You have been standing in front of that clematis for 2 summers now, watching it do almost nothing. A few blooms last May, if you were lucky. A couple of hopeful little shoots that pushed out in spring and then just quit on you by the time the real heat arrived. And if you are anything like most of the people who find their way to this channel, a quiet thought has been forming in the back of your head. Maybe it is you. Maybe you have got no touch for this. Maybe the plant was a dud from the moment it left the shelf. Or maybe clematis is simply one of those plants that other people can grow and you cannot. I am going to ask you to set that thought down right now, because it is not true, and it has never been true. Here is what nobody at the garden center bothered to tell you when they rang you up. Clematis is not a lazy plant. Clematis is not a difficult plant. Clematis is a plant that the overwhelming majority of American gardeners are simply growing in the wrong way, using instructions that were never complete to begin with. And the reason those instructions were never complete is not some grand secret. It is much simpler than that. The people selling you the plant have absolutely no reason to teach you how to make it thrive. A gardener whose clematis explodes into a wall of color does not come back in 18 months to buy a replacement. That is wonderful news for your yard and terrible news for their register. There is a set of techniques, 6 of them, that serious growers, the ones who show at Flower Society exhibitions, and the ones who have been coaxing vines up brick and iron for 30 years, have been using without much fanfare to drive clematis growth at something close to 3 times the pace an ordinary gardener ever witnesses. Today I am going to hand every one of them to you, in order, holding nothing back. We are going to talk about the temperature of the ground your plant is sitting in, which is killing more clematis than any pest or disease ever will. We are going to talk about how the vine physically grabs its support, and why the beautiful trellis you bought is very likely doing nothing for it. We are going to talk about how a first-season cut that is going to feel like sabotage and is actually the single kindest thing you can do for the plant. And we are going to get to trick number 5, which is going to sound so backwards, so completely upside down, that your instinct is going to be to argue with me. Do not argue with me yet. Sit with it. Let me walk you through the biology, and by the end you are going to wonder why anyone ever told you to do it the other way. Before we go one step further, I need 30 seconds of participation from you. Drop your USDA hardiness zone down in the comments below. Just the number. It takes almost no effort, and it tells me exactly what kind of growing conditions this community is working with, which lets me tailor everything I make here to the summers and winters you are actually facing. Whether you are freezing up in Zone 4 in the Dakotas or baking down in Zone 9 along the coast of Texas, every principle we cover today still applies to you. The cultivar changes, the timing bends a little, but the fundamentals hold. So tell me where you are growing, and let us get into it. This is a countdown, and I am building it on purpose. I am going to work my way down toward number 1. And I am doing that because number 1 is the foundation the other 5 stand on. Each of these tricks is worth something entirely on its own. But the real payoff comes when you stack them, because they do not simply add up, they multiply into each other. By the time we reach the bottom of the list, you are going to see with total clarity why your vine has been stuck in that maddening sit-there-and-sulk phase, and you are going to have the entire blueprint for breaking it out of that phase permanently. Trick number 6. Keep the roots cool while the top bakes. Let me open with the mistake that quietly strangles more clematis than anything else on this list, and it is the one that leaves no fingerprints. There is no wilting to warn you, no yellow leaves. Nothing above the soil looks wrong at all. The tips might even be pushing out a little fresh growth. But down where you cannot see, your plant has slammed on the brakes. Here is what is going on underground. The clematis root system is unusually touchy about how warm the soil around it gets, and this becomes a serious problem the moment summer heat starts to build with any speed. If you are growing anywhere that the ground bakes, and by that I mean most of the country from Zone 6 on up, across the south, through the middle of the map, along the mid-Atlantic, out into the dry southwest, this is aimed squarely at you. Once the soil down at the root zone pushes past somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 80 degrees, the plant makes a decision. It stops spending its energy on growing and starts spending it on simply holding on to water and staying alive. Plant physiologists have a name for this shutdown. The top of the vine slows to a crawl. Buds that were forming just sit there and refuse to open. New shoots stop appearing. And the gardener walks out on a scorching afternoon at the tail end of July, looks at a plant that has not moved an inch in weeks, and cannot make sense of it, because the thing is plainly still alive. And it is. Alive and growing are not the same condition. That is the whole lesson right there. The remedy is almost embarrassingly cheap, and I want you running 2 versions of it at the same time, not 1. The first is mulch, and how you place it matters as much as whether you place it. Lay down a ring of organic mulch 2 to 3 inches thick, spread out generously around the base of the plant. Shredded bark, aged wood chips, leaf mold from last autumn, spent straw that has broken down a little, whatever your area gives you cheaply, but do not, under any circumstances, shove that mulch up against the stem. Leave a clear collar of 2 or 3 inches of open soil right around where the plant comes out of the ground. Mulch jammed against the crown holds moisture exactly where it should not be held, and that is an open invitation to crown rot, which will finish your plant off far faster than any heat wave. A well-made ring with breathing room, on the other hand, works like a blanket in reverse. On a brutal afternoon in August, that layer can hold the soil beneath it a good 6 to 10 degrees cooler than the bare ground a foot away. And those few degrees are the entire margin between roots that keep working and roots that have gone half-dormant just to survive. The second version is what I like to call living shade. You plant low, shallow-rooted companions right at the front of the clematis. Plants that throw shade across the soil surface without driving thirsty roots down into the territory your clematis needs for itself. This is where growers with a good eye start having fun, because done right it looks gorgeous. Low hardy geraniums are the classic choice here, and a variety like the long-blooming violet-blue types that mound up and flower from late spring, clear through to frost across zones 4 through 9, will carpet the ground at your vine's feet without ever fighting it for the deep water below. In a shadier spot, hostas earn their keep, hardy through zones 3 to 9, their wide leaves throwing a dense living roof over the root run. In a sunnier position, low catmint in soft lavender blue, comfortable in zones 3 through 8, does the same job and happens to echo the flower colors climbing above it, which is a gift you did not even ask for. The rule underneath all of it is consistent. You want something that stays low, roots shallow, and spreads enough to cover the ground, and you want to keep the aggressive stuff well away. Big ornamental grasses, sprawling deep-rooted perennials, anything with a hungry fibrous root mass, none of that goes anywhere near the base. The clematis root run goes deep and needs to stay cool, but it will not tolerate a bully sharing its space. Let me name a few cultivars that reward this kind of root management more dramatically than others, because I would rather give you something you can act on than a vague principle. The famous violet-blue Jackmanii, hardy across zones 4 through 9, is vigorous up top and genuinely delicate about root heat. Nellie Moser, that pale pink so many American gardeners already own, with the deeper stripe running down each petal, zones 4 through 9, is one of the most heat-sensitive of the big flowered kinds and one of the most grateful for a cool root run. Henryi in clean white and the deep carmine of Ville de Lyon, both zones 4 through 9, are equally prone to stalling out in the middle of a hot summer if you leave their feet exposed. Give any one of them cool, evenly moist soil down below, and instead of quitting on you in late June, it will carry right through the heat and hand you its best show of the whole year in the cooler weeks of early fall. And do not tune out if you garden somewhere cold, thinking this is not your problem. It is. Even up in zone 5 and below, a hard heat spell in late July, or through August, can spike your soil temperature just long enough to knock the plant off its rhythm at the exact moment you want it building toward that late summer flush. Cool roots equal active growth. That does not change because your winters are harsh. Mulch the ring, plant the companions, and keep those feet cool no matter what your zip code reads. Trick number 5. Feed it the wrong fertilizer on purpose. Here we are. This is the one I promised you at the top. This is the trick that is going to feel completely upside down the first time it lands, and I will be honest with you. When it first crossed my path, I dug in my heels and resisted it too, because it runs directly against everything the standard advice tells you to pour on a flowering vine. So do me a favor and stay with the explanation all the way through, because the science underneath it is solid, and once it clicks, you will never grab the wrong bottle again. I want you to stop feeding your clematis with a balanced, all-purpose fertilizer, I want you to stop reaching for the general-purpose bloom booster. I know exactly how that sounds. Bear with me. Most people, when they decide to feed their vine, pick up something balanced, a tidy, even formula, or a product with the word bloom slapped across the front, and they feed, and the results are fine. Fine. The plant grows, some flowers show up, everything is acceptable. What those gardeners never get to see is what the same plant does when you feed it the way its own chemistry is actually built to be fed, which is not with a balanced formula at all. Here is the mechanism. A clematis is a climber. That means it is being asked to do something a plant sitting flat on the ground never has to worry about. It is hauling water and dissolved nutrients straight up, sometimes 6, 8, 10, 12 feet into the air, working against gravity the whole way. That is a plumbing job, plain and simple. And the one mineral that governs how well a plant handles that plumbing, how efficiently it moves water from the roots up through the stems, out to the leaf tips and into those big fat flower buds, is potassium. Not nitrogen, not phosphorus, potassium. A high nitrogen feed will fool you at first. You get a burst of soft, lush, green growth, the vine leaps upward, and you feel like a genius. Then two things happen that you very much did not want. First, all that nitrogen-driven growth comes in soft and weak. It snaps in the wind, and worse, it is a magnet for the single most feared disease a clematis faces, the wilt. Clematis wilt runs on a fungus that adores exactly that kind of soft, swollen, overfed tissue, and it can bring an entire vine down almost overnight, an entire summer of growth gone black and limp in a day or two. Most people who watch that happen assume they did something terribly wrong. Very often what they actually did was fatten the plant up into the perfect target with the wrong fertilizer. The second problem is simpler. Nitrogen tells the plant to make more plant, more stems, more leaves, more side shoots. It pulls energy away from making flowers, so you end up with a bigger, leafier, greener vine carrying fewer blooms, which is the precise opposite of the reason you planted a clematis in the first place. You are paying money to suppress the one thing you wanted most. So here is the answer, the feeding move that experienced vine growers have been quietly using for years. Tomato fertilizer. Specifically a liquid tomato feed that runs high in potassium, something in the range of a 488, with roughly double or even triple the potassium against the nitrogen. Some growers alternate that with a dedicated high-potassium liquid feed, a 066 kind of number, right through the stretch when buds and flowers are developing. Why tomatoes of all things? Because a tomato plant faces the identical plumbing challenge your clematis does. It is shoving water and nutrients straight up into heavy, dense fruit under blazing sun, and it demands a lot of potassium to pull that off. The agricultural world has poured decades of research into perfecting exactly that kind of high-potassium liquid feed, and your clematis responds to it in a way that is genuinely going to surprise you the first season you try it. The stems firm up, the flower count climbs, and not by a little, and the plant becomes noticeably tougher against the wilt pressure that soft nitrogen growth invites in. Timing is not complicated. Start your diluted liquid tomato feed, mixed to whatever the bottle tells you, every 2 weeks, the moment you can see the first flower buds forming on the vine. That visible bud is your green light. Buds show up, the potassium starts. And use the liquid form, not the granular, because it matters. Granular fertilizer has to be broken down by soil life before the plant can use it, which can mean a wait of 2 to 4 weeks before it does anything. A liquid feed goes to work within hours. The roots pull it up almost immediately, and you get a fast, precise boost during the exact window when the plant can use it. For those of you growing the Group 2 clematis, the large-flowered kinds that bloom twice, once on old wood and again on new, varieties like the deep purple President, the green-tinged white of Duchess of Edinburgh, or the lavender-blue General Sikorsky, all comfortable through zones 4 to 9, running this potassium routine through both the spring show and the late summer repeat gives you a measurable jump in flower count over a plant fed the ordinary balanced way. The growers who have made the switch do not describe the difference as slight, they describe it as dramatic. For the Group 3 clematis, the ones you cut hard and that bloom entirely on the current year's growth, the magenta of Ernest Markham, the deep violet of Jackmanii superba, the Viticella types like the red-purple Polish Spirit, or the rich violet of Étoile Violette, All zones 4 through 9. You begin the potassium feed in late spring. Once the fresh growth from that hard spring cut has properly established itself and buds are starting to set. Then you keep it going every 2 weeks straight through the heart of the flowering season. Now sit with the arithmetic for a second, because it is almost silly. A good bottle of liquid tomato feed runs somewhere between $8 and $15 at any garden center or hardware store you walk into. That single bottle carries you through an entire season of feeding every 2 weeks, and the return on that one purchase, by the honest accounting of growers who have set the two plants side by side and counted, is a vine carrying 2 to 4 times the flowers of a nitrogen-fed plant grown in the very same conditions. 2 to 4 times the blooms for the price of lunch. That is not a gardening tip. That is a decision with a return you can measure. Let me pause right here, because if you are still with me this deep into the video, you did not stumble in by accident. You are not idly scrolling gardening clips. You are the kind of gardener who wants to understand why a thing works, not just be handed a headline and a promise. And I have enormous respect for that, because that is exactly the person this channel is built for. If you have spent one too many summers standing in front of a plant that refused to pay you back for the money and the care you put in, this is where you come for the real answer, the whole answer, not the pretty picture with the useful half left out. Tap that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, it takes 3 seconds, and every week I put out another one of these, built for gardeners who want the specifics and the honest reasoning behind them. Subscribe now so the next one lands in front of you. We still have 4 tricks to go, and number 1 is the ground the whole thing is built on. Stay with me. Trick number 4, the half-inch rule your trellis is breaking. Let me tell you something that is going to change how you look at a stalled clematis forever. Over the years, I have talked with more gardeners than I can count who had every single thing right. Good spot, good sun, good watering, good soil. And their clematis still climbed to 3 or 4 feet, planted itself there, and flat out refused to go any higher. Not sick, not dying, just parked. And nearly every time, once we traced it back, the whole problem came down to one thing nobody had thought to check: the support. Here is the piece almost nobody knows. Most people assume a clematis climbs the way a wisteria or a honeysuckle does, wrapping its main stem around a post and spiraling its way up. That is not how a clematis works at all. A clematis climbs with its leaf stems. The little stalks that hold each leaf out from the vine, the petioles, are what reach out and coil around a support. And those petioles are delicate. They are built to wrap around thin things, and thin is the operative word, because a clematis petiole can grip an object up to roughly ½ inch across, and no more. Anything fatter than about ½ inch and the petiole simply cannot close around it. It reaches out, finds a surface too wide to hold, comes up empty, and the growing tip of the vine stops climbing and starts hunting. I call it the searching phase. The tip casts around looking for something it can actually grab, and if it never finds one, the whole thing stalls out. The vine sits there looking perfectly healthy while accomplishing absolutely nothing. Now picture the supports that fill the aisles at every garden center and home improvement store in the country. Handsome wooden lattice with wide cedar slats. Heavy iron trellis with thick bars. Those big fan-shaped ornamental trellises with broad painted timbers. All lovely to look at. All, for a clematis, close to useless without help, because the petioles cannot get a grip on any of the main pieces. The vine tries, fails, and stops. And the person who sold you that $40 trellis is never going to mention it, because selling you the trellis was the whole point. The fix costs next to nothing and takes about 20 minutes. You string thin horizontal lines across the support you already own, using any one of 3 materials. Fishing line in the 12 to 20 pound range works beautifully and practically disappears from a few feet away. Natural jute twine works well too, breaks down cleanly over time, and holds up through a season. Or thin plastic-coated wire at the skinnier end of the range. Run those horizontal lines every 6 to 8 inches up the full height of the support. The moment you do, you have built an unbroken ladder of grippable material, and the vine finds something to hold within an inch or 2 of wherever it happens to be sitting, locks on, and starts moving up again. You can do the same thing with galvanized wire mesh or ordinary small-gauge chicken wire, stretched over a frame or stapled flat across the face of whatever you already have. Every strand in that mesh sits comfortably under the ½ inch limit, and the grid gives the vine hundreds of grip points across the entire surface. This is the move when you want to cover a long fence run or a bare block wall in a hurry, and it is perfect for hiding something ugly, a chain link fence, a plain concrete wall, the side of a tired old shed, because once the vine takes hold and fills in, the structure underneath vanishes completely beneath the flowers. Let me make this concrete with a comparison. Say you plant sweet autumn clematis, one of the fastest and most vigorous species you can buy in this country, hardy through zones 4 to 9. Put it at the foot of a chain link fence. Chain link is about as close to ideal clematis support as anything gets. The wire is thin, the openings are even, and there are grip points everywhere. Fed properly, on that fence, a single plant can blanket 30 or 40 feet of run in 2 full seasons. Now take the identical plant, same soil, same sun, same water, and set it against a smooth painted privacy fence with nothing added. It will climb to 2 or 3 feet and spin in place for years. The only thing that changed is whether it had something to hold. For anyone running clematis up a pergola or an arbor, where the main uprights are far too wide for those petioles, wrap the posts in chicken wire, or run jute netting up the face of each one before you plant. Heavy blooming Group 2 varieties like the near black ruby of Niobe, zones 4 through 9, or the lavender doubles of Vivian Pinel, zones 4 through 9, will smother a pergola completely if you give them something to grab. Without it, they will decorate the bottom of the post and stop there. One more note on the first season. As your plant pushes out new growth that first year, guide those shoots toward your support lines by hand and tie them on loosely, using soft plant clips or gentle loops of jute. Loosely. You want to steer the vine, not choke it. It will start gripping on its own the moment it touches the thin material, but a little hand guiding early keeps it aimed upward and cuts out those wasted searching pauses that can cost you weeks in a short season. $20 a fishing line and an hour of your time solves a problem that keeps thousands of clematis stuck for years. Do not let it go another summer. Trick number 3. The first year cut that feels like a mistake. Steel yourself for this one, because this is the technique that quietly separates the gardeners who end up with a full, breathtaking, top-to-bottom clematis in 3 years, from the ones who are still fussing over a thin, 2-stemmed straggler 5 years on, and cannot for the life of them figure out what went wrong. It is going to feel wrong. I know. You spent your $12 or $15 on this plant. You carried it home, you settled it into the ground, it has 2 or 3 eager stems reaching for the trellis, and I am about to tell you to take a pair of shears and cut the entire thing down to 6 to 12 inches from the soil in its first spring, and then walk away and leave it. Yes, that is exactly what I am telling you to do. Here is the biology that makes it the right call. In its first year in the ground, a young clematis is quietly deciding where to spend its energy. Left alone, it splits that energy between the growth you can see up top and the root system you cannot, and it does not split it fairly. Its instinct pushes it to chase sunlight, so it pours resources into stem and leaf while the roots stay comparatively shallow and small. When you cut the whole top back hard, right down to that 6 to 12-inch stub, no matter which pruning group the plant belongs to, you wipe out the entire above-ground demand in one stroke. From that point on, every bit of energy the plant produces goes straight down into the roots. The root system spreads out fast and drives down deep, laying the underground framework that is going to power explosive top growth in years 2 and 3. You are not throwing this plant away. You are investing it. And there is a second payoff that is every bit as important. When you cut hard, every dormant bud along the short piece of stem you left behind, and along the crown now sitting a couple of inches under the soil, which I will come back to at number 1, gets the chance to send up its own fresh shoot from the base. One firm first-year cut can wake up 4, 5, 6, sometimes as many as 8 separate shoots rising out of the ground. Each one hardens into a structural stem by the next season. Instead of a clematis dragging 1 or 2 skinny vines up the support, you get one climbing on half a dozen sturdy independent stems at once. When that plant hits full bloom, the difference is not subtle. It is the difference between a vine and a vent. Let me speak to the real reason most people never make this cut. Because it is not ignorance, it is nerve. You bought the plant, you want flowers this year, so you trim it lightly or skip the cut altogether. And then you wait. And you spend the next few summers wondering why the vine down the street is a lush curtain of color, while yours is a handful of sticks pointing at the sky. That is the gap between patience aimed correctly and patience aimed timidly. The gardener who cuts hard that first spring gives up one season of bloom and buys years of accelerated performance. The gardener who cannot bring themselves to do it settles for acceptable for the entire life of the plant. The recommendation is well established among serious clematis growers and the horticultural societies that document this stuff. A hard cut in the first year, whatever the pruning group, moves the plant's maturity forward by a full season and builds a structurally better vine for the long haul. This is not something a neighbor made up over the fence. It is settled ground, backed by decades of side-by-side trials. Here is how it plays out by group. For Group 1, the early bloomers that flower on old wood, varieties like the freckled cream of some of the Alpina relatives or dusky rose types hardy through zones 6 to 9, the hard cut applies in year 1 only. After that, you touch these plants lightly and only right after they finish flowering, because next year's buds form on this year's new growth. Cut too late or too deep after that first year, and you are shearing off next spring's flowers. First year hard, then a light hand forever after. For Group 2, the big double blooming kinds, your Nellie Moser, your Henry, the silvery mauve of Belle of Woking, the doubles of Vivian Pennell, hard cut in year 1 only. From the second year on, you prune selectively right after the spring flush to encourage a second late summer show, plus a light tidy in early spring to clear out dead and damaged wood, nothing more. For Group 3, the late bloomers, the Viticellas and the Integrifolias, your Jackmanii, Ernest Markham, Polish Spirit, Étoile Violette, the nodding bells of Betty Corning, all zones 4 through 9, these get cut hard every single year in late winter or very early spring as a matter of routine. The first year sacrificial cut is just the opening chapter of a habit that serves them their whole lives. These are the easiest clematis in the whole garden to keep, precisely because they welcome the hard cut and answer it with a mountain of new growth every year. A last word of reassurance. Some of you are going to make the cut, watch fresh new growth push out, and then see a shoot or two suddenly collapse and wilt, and your heart is going to drop. It can look like disaster, but if the wilt is limited to 1 or 2 shoots and not the whole plant, and if you planted deep the way I am about to describe, do not yank the plant out of the ground. Cut the wilted shoot back to firm, healthy tissue and wait. The buried buds down at the crown will send up clean replacement growth within a few weeks. A deeply planted clematis that loses a shoot is not dying on you. It is rerouting. Learn to tell the two apart, and respond with a steady hand instead of a panicked one. Trick number 2. Sweeten the soil nobody ever told you to check. This is the one almost nobody talks about, and it is the reason a clematis can have everything else going for it and still refuse to hit top gear. I am talking about the chemistry of the soil itself, and specifically how sour or sweet it is, what a gardener means when they talk about pH. Here is the piece that gets left out at the register. A clematis does not want the same soil most of your other favorites want. A great many of the plants people love, the acid lovers, the azaleas and the rhododendrons and the blueberries, want their ground on the sour side. A clematis wants the opposite. It performs best in soil that runs neutral to slightly sweet, slightly on the alkaline side of the line. And an awful lot of American gardens, especially where there is regular rainfall, where pine needles or oak leaves have been breaking down for years, or where the native ground is naturally acidic to begin with, drift steadily sourer over time without anyone noticing. The plant sits in soil that is quietly working against it, and no amount of feeding or watering fully makes up for it. When the ground is too sour for a clematis, a couple of things go wrong at once. Certain nutrients the plant needs get chemically locked up in the soil, present but unavailable, so the plant effectively starves in the middle of plenty. Growth slows, the leaves can go a tired pale green, and the plant simply never reaches the vigor its genetics promise. You can pour on the best liquid tomato feed in the world, and if the soil chemistry is fighting you, the plant cannot fully use it. The fix is cheap, and it is old-fashioned. You gently sweeten the ground around the root zone. Garden lime is the classic tool. A mild dose of it worked lightly into the surface soil in the ring around the base, Following the rate on the bag will nudge the pH up toward the range a clematis actually wants. Crushed eggshells, saved and rinsed and ground down over time, do a slower, gentler version of the same job and cost you nothing but the trouble of keeping them. A handful of wood ash from a clean, untreated wood fire, used sparingly, does it too, though go easy, because ash moves the needle fast. The point is not to shock the soil. The point is a slow, steady sweetening that brings the ground into the range where the plant can finally get at everything you are feeding it. Before you do any of this, spend a few dollars on a simple soil pH test kit, the kind you can pick up at any garden center or order for the cost of a sandwich. Test the ground where your clematis lives or where you plan to put one. If it reads down in the sour range, below neutral, you have very likely found a hidden break that has been on the whole time. Sweeten it gradually over a season, retest, and adjust. This is not a one-and-done job. In a garden that naturally trends acidic, it is a gentle habit, a light touch each year to hold the ground where the vine wants it. Let me be specific about who benefits most, because this varies. Gardeners in regions with acidic native soil and heavy rainfall, much of the southeast, the Pacific Northwest, parts of the Northeast, stand to gain the most from paying attention to this, because their ground fights them hardest. The large-flowered hybrids in particular, your Nellie Moser, your President, your Henryi, all zones 4 to 9, are the fussiest about soil chemistry and the quickest to reward you for getting it right. The tougher Group 3 vigorous types, the Viticellas and the Jackmanii sorts, are more forgiving and will soldier on in less than perfect ground, but even they climb a notch when the chemistry comes into range. And if you garden out west or across the drier middle of the country where the native soil already tends alkaline, you may find you have this one handled for free by geography, in which case leave it alone. Test first, then decide. Never sweeten blind. This is the trick that lets the other 5 actually reach the plant. Cool roots, potassium feed, a strong pruning frame, none of it fully pays off if the soil chemistry is quietly refusing to hand the nutrients over. Get the ground into the right range and everything else you do finally lands. Trick number 1. Bury it deep and lean it in. And here we are. Number 1. The technique the entire rest of this video stands on. Because it does not matter how well you feed, how thin your support lines are, how perfectly you time that sacrificial cut, or how sweet you get the soil. If you put your clematis in the ground wrong on day 1, you have handed it a structural handicap it will be fighting for years. And most American gardeners are, in fact, planting their clematis wrong. Here is the standard version, the one almost everybody does. You dig a hole about as deep as the pot the plant came in. You set the plant in so the top of the root ball sits level with the ground. You backfill, firm it, water it, and walk off. And then you are baffled when the vine catches wilt, sends up only 1 or 2 stems no matter how you prune, and takes what feels like forever to build any real momentum. Here is what should be happening instead, and I need you to hear this clearly, because it flatly contradicts the planting advice you would follow for nearly every other perennial you own. Plant your clematis deep. Set the crown, the spot where the stems come up out of the root ball, a good 2 to 5 inches beneath the finished level of the soil. For most plants, that would be a straight path to crown rot and a dead plant. For a clematis, it is precisely the right move, and the reason runs straight out of how the plant is built. When you bury the crown below the soil line, every leaf node along that buried stretch of stem becomes a candidate to grow into a whole new shoot. This is the exact same trick that lets you propagate a clematis from a cutting, any node along the stem, given moist soil or a rooting medium to sit in, can throw out roots and become a new plant. In the ground, those buried nodes turn into basal shoots. Basal shoots turn into structural stems, and more structural stems means a fuller, denser, far more striking vine. This one decision, dropping the crown 2 to 5 inches below where the nursery pot had it, is the most direct, most cost-free architectural move you can make to multiply the coverage this plant gives you. There is a second reason deep planting matters, and it becomes life or death in cold winter country. If a stem gets killed off by a hard freeze, a late spring cold snap, or the early creep of wilt, and every one of those things happens, especially across zones 4 through 6, the buried crown sitting safely below the frost line holds enough dormant node material to rebuild the entire plant above ground in a single season. This is why old hands in cold climates will tell you a deeply planted clematis is close to impossible to kill outright. The whole top can die back to nothing, and the plant simply will not go with it. The crown down in the warm soil pushes fresh growth in spring with a stubbornness a shallowly planted vine can never match. And down in zones 7 through 9, where the enemy is summer heat rather than winter cold, that same deep crown gives the plant an insulated core of roots, shielded from the wild soil temperature swings that drive the stalling I described back at number 6. Deep planting and cool root mulching are a team. The mulch guards from above, the depth guards from within, and together, they wrap the plant in 2 layers of protection. Now the second half of this technique, and this is the part where a lot of gardeners quit early. Lean the plant into its support at about a 45-degree angle as you set it. Do not stand it up straight. Set it on a slant, tilting the stems toward the structure it is going to climb. Here is why the geometry earns its keep. When you set the plant on that diagonal, several things happen at once. First, you take a lot of mechanical strain off those brittle young stems, which are at their most fragile in the first weeks after transplant. Stand them bolt upright and they are exposed to full wind loading from day 1. Lay them on a slant and the load spreads along the length of the stem and directs itself naturally toward the support, where the plant can brace against it right away. Second, the angle puts the growing tip physically closer to the climbing surface from the very start. Instead of coming straight up and then having to cast around sideways hunting for the trellis, the tip is already leaning toward it. It finds a grip faster and starts climbing sooner. Every day the vine spends searching instead of climbing is a day of growth thrown away, and the angle deletes that wasted time from the first day in the ground. Third, and this one is quiet but genuinely important, the buried section of an angled stem runs on a diagonal through the soil instead of straight down, which means it presents a longer run of buried stem, and therefore more buried nodes, to the soil than a vertical planting ever could. More buried nodes means more potential basal shoots, means more structural stems coming up in your first spring. The slant multiplies the payoff of the depth. Let me walk you through the actual mechanics so you can do this exactly right. Dig your hole good and wide, wider than the root ball, and deep enough to drop the crown 2 to 5 inches below grade. Mix your backfill with a generous helping of well-rotted compost, and I mean plain compost for structure and drainage. Not a rich high-nitrogen amendment, just something to open the soil up and help the young roots explore. Compost from your own pile or your town's free program does the job perfectly. Set the plant into the hole on that 45-degree lean, tipped toward the support, with the root ball seated down in the deeper part of the hole. Backfill carefully, pressing gently around the root ball to close up air pockets without packing the soil down hard. Water it in thoroughly to settle everything, lay your mulch ring down right away, and circle straight back to trick number 6, because what you have just buried needs to stay cool and protected all season long. Now let me point you toward the right plants, because actionable advice means knowing what to actually ask for. If you are gardening in the cold end, zones 4 through 6, look for cultivars that pair real cold hardiness with a strong response to deep planting. The Alpina and Macropetala types, the little nodding bell Clematis, are among the toughest you can buy, performing right down into zones 3 and 4, and they answer deep planting with a flush of basal shoots and remarkable cold resilience. Named Macropetala varieties in soft blue or rosy pink are worth hunting down. For big-flowered kinds in cold ground, Jackmanii, the President, Niobe, and a deep velvety red like Westerplatte, zones 4 through 9, all thrive as deeply planted specimens. If you are down in the warm end, zones 7 through 9, where managing heat and stretching the season matter more than surviving winter, the Texensis hybrids are worth a look alongside the vigorous Group 3 standards. The warm pinks of the Texensis types, hardy through zones 5 to 9, and Viticella varieties in wine red or white with green-tipped sepals, zones 4 through 9, shrug off southern heat far better than the big-flowered hybrids do. All of them respond to deep planting. Every plant I have named today, from Jackmanii to the Texensis pinks to Betty Corning, planted deep, leaned toward its support, mulch to keep the roots cool, growing in soil sweetened into the range it actually wants, fed with high-potassium liquid tomato feed every 2 weeks from the first bud, given thin lines to grip, and cut hard in its first spring no matter the group, every one of them will perform at a level that changes the character of wherever you put it. A fence line, an arbor, a pergola, a blank wall, a mailbox post. This is one of the most spectacular plants in the American garden, and it has been quietly underperforming in yard after yard for one reason only. Nobody handed the owner these 6 techniques on the day they carried it home. Let me pull this together for you, because these 6 tricks are not a checklist you run through once and forget. They are a system, and a system behaves differently from a pile of tips. Every piece props up the others. Run all 6 at once, and the effect does not simply add up, it compounds, because you are clearing away every single thing standing between this plant and its full genetic potential, all at the same time. Think about your investment in this vine as a return that arrives in 3 phases. In the first year, you are building, below ground and above. You plant deep and on a lean. You sweeten the soil into range. You mulch the root zone and set your companions. You run the thin support lines. You make the hard sacrificial cut that first spring. And the vine looks modest, and you get no flowers, and that is precisely correct. Under the surface, the root system is spreading at a pace it could never have reached from a shallow planting and an untouched top. Dormant buds along that buried crown are waking up. The whole foundation is going in. In the second year, the return starts to show itself. Several basal stems are climbing the support at once. The liquid tomato feed kicks in the moment buds appear, driving a flower count that is going to genuinely surprise you next to an ordinary fed plant. The thin lines are disappearing under growth. The mulch and the companions are holding the root temperature steady through the hot weeks. You are tending a thriving plant now, not nursing a struggling one. In the third year, the garden more or less runs itself. The vine is fully established. The roots are deep, tough, and far-reaching. If yours is a group 3, the annual hard cut takes 10 minutes in late winter. The feeding is just a rhythm you no longer think about, a 2-minute job on your regular walk through the garden. And what you are left with is a clematis performing at the full, spectacular top of its ability, not the slow, sulking, sit-and-wait version that so many gardeners quietly settle for because nobody ever gave them the whole picture when it counted. So here is what I want you to do after this video. 3 specific steps. Step 1. Find out which pruning group your clematis belongs to. The tag it came with should say, if it does not, look the variety up by name. Group 1 blooms early on old wood, so you prune lightly and only right after it flowers, never in late summer or fall. Group 2 is the big double bloomer, so you prune selectively after the spring flush and lightly tidy in early spring. Group 3 blooms late on new wood, so you cut it hard every year in late winter down to about 12 to 18 inches. Knowing your group from day 1 keeps you from committing the single most common clematis mistake there is, which is pruning at the wrong moment and cutting away next season's flowers before they ever open. Step 2. Walk your planting spot and take a hard look at the support. Measure the width of the main pieces the vine has to grab. Anything wider than ½ an inch needs thin helper lines strung across it before the plant ever goes in. Buy your fishing line or your jute before you buy the plant. The whole job is 20 minutes, and it wipes out one of the most common and most invisible reasons a clematis stalls. Step 3. On your way through the garden center, stop at the fertilizer shelf before you get anywhere near the plants. Pick up a bottle of liquid tomato feed. Liquid, not granular, with a formula that runs high in potassium against nitrogen, something around a 488 or a dedicated high-potassium bloom feed. It costs you less than $15, and it changes what your clematis does from the very first time you see a bud form. Those are your 3 moves before the car is even parked at the nursery. Choosing the plant comes after. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your state or your USDA zone in the comments right now, and tell me which of these 6 tricks you had never heard before today. Which one made something click? I really do want to know. For a lot of you it is going to be number 5, the tomato feed, and I completely understand that reaction, because it runs against everything the standard advice preaches. For others it is going to be number 2, the soil chemistry, because you have had a perfectly healthy-looking vine sitting stubbornly in place for 2 seasons, and you never once thought to test the ground beneath it. And for plenty of you it is going to be number 4, that ½ inch rule, Because you have had a healthy plant parked at 3 feet on a thick fancy trellis for 2 full years and never made the connection. Tell me which one it was. And if you have not subscribed yet, I would love to know what is holding you back. This is free. A new one comes out every single week. It exists for one reason and one reason only: to hand real American gardeners the specific, honest, practical information the industry has no reason to give away. No sponsored plants. No paid recommendations. No gorgeous photograph with the most useful part left out of frame. Just what actually works. Subscribe. And do one more thing for me. Share this with one person in your life who has a clematis that is not doing what they hoped for. One neighbor, one friend, one family member who keeps spending money every spring on plants that never quite get there. What is in this video changes the way a person grows this plant for good. I am Helen, this is Helen's Front Yard, and I will see you in the next one.